Herbert McCabe has a slightly provocative line where he says, no stupid person can be good. He's definitely not saying that prudence and being a good person is about being clever, but he is saying that thinking clearly and seeing the world clearly is integral to living a good life.
I want to get really, really hench like World's Strongest Man in order that I'm going to be able to be fitter to go on long walks. Like, that's a terrible decision.
Yeah. What are ways we might think about prudence implying finding a spouse, getting married, choosing where to live, a religious vocation possibly, big life decisions like that?
You've sold me. I don't want to make horrible decisions. I want to choose well. How do we go about doing that?
Hello, I'm Father John Church.
Hello, I'm Father Toby Lees.
And welcome to Good Habits, our podcast exploring questions of meaning through the tradition of the virtues. This summer, we were both in Rome for the Jubilee of Youth, a wonderful gathering of Catholic young people from across the world, more than a million and a half, at an event with Pope Leo just outside of Rome. And on the Saturday evening of that vigil, there was a moment when 3 young people were chosen to put questions to the Pope. And one of them, I remember, asked, Holy Father, young people nowadays really struggle to make decisions. What advice do you have? It's clearly a question that's on the mind.
Yeah, and I think this is where, if we think about the moral life in terms of the virtues, it can be really, really liberating. Because there are so many options that we have. So many more options any given day about what I could do than, say, even when I was growing up. I think it's probably my destiny in this podcast series to play like the old man who speaks about when I was growing up.
Feel free.
But you have so many choices, and if we think of life purely in terms of always getting the best possible outcomes, then actually we will just find ourselves just so crucified actually by the number of options that we have, and the fear, paralyzed by the fear of getting it wrong. Whereas if we conceive of the moral life more fundamentally in terms of who am I becoming, then that can be liberating when we realize actually it doesn't matter if I don't get it perfect every single time. What I'm seeking to do is to become better, to be more loving. And whilst prudence that we're going to talk about, like, it is about making the best choices, at the same time it respects the fact that we will not have complete certainty, and we'll get onto that more later. But if we think in terms of becoming rather than outcomes, and then we think if we become a certain sort of person, then we're not controlled by events and circumstances around us. And that's one of the things that we want to be able to be. We want to be the sort of person who can be happy even when the going is tough. And that's the difference between a virtue-based morality and a virtue-based idea of happiness versus an idea of morality which is all about, like, what happens when I do this.
About the kind of person I want to become.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And so prudence that we're going to be discussing in this episode, you could say it's a virtue with a bit of a branding problem. Prudence is not a word that gets people excited. If you went onto the high street and asked the first person you bumped into, what do you think prudence is? What do you think they might say?
Well, I remember the first time prudent got used as a person that I was conscious of was with Gordon Brown, who's known as being the prudent chancellor. And sure, there's lots of great things about Gordon Brown, but maybe we don't associate him with the happy life, and essential to be like Gordon Brown in order to be happy. So yeah, maybe prudence has got a branding problem.
It's got the sense of carefulness, caution.
Yeah, like risk averse, like wouldn't
exactly.
ever go for it, always going to FTSE 100 tracker, never go after that slightly racy stock.
Exactly, that's where prudence is. And what we want to explore today is prudence as an intellectual virtue. So we discussed last time the powers, the fundamental capacities of the human person, and the virtues are these skills we have that perfect these powers and enable us to flourish as human beings. A good life is a happy life. And prudence is the virtue we're situating in our intellect. It perfects our power to reason, to know, to understand.
So it's really important that the moral life begins in seeing well. It's not just this sense of, like, I must do this because I've been told to do this. Because, as we said, you can't get a manual that encompasses all the different things that go on in any given day, let alone a human life. And so it becomes important to see well in order to know how to act well. But what it's important to say, I think, from the outset is that this isn't like your professor smarts. No. It's more street smarts.
Indeed. Practical wisdom.
Yeah, and we can speak about, people have the saying of the nutty professor.
Yes.
And as I was thinking about this, I was remembering one of my supervisors when I was studying law at Cambridge, and we, very, very bright man, one of the leading people in his area of law. He went on, he became sort of MP of Cambridge. I feel may have made him a little bit easy to identify by that, but apologies. There we go. Maybe there are other law professors who've been Cambridge MPs. Sure. Perhaps not. Maybe it wasn't prudent of me to mention him. But anyway, what he did with one supervision that we had, we turned up to his rooms in his college, and he wasn't there. And so we were sort of waiting outside of the room, waiting for him to arrive. And then after about 10, 15 minutes, we think, well, this is strange, he's not there. We go down to the porter's lodge and we hear, oh, Professor so-and-so is pretty annoyed with you. You're supposed to be at his house for your supervision today. And we cycled up there, got the address and arrived, and he was a little bit annoyed with us and said that he'd had to have the supervision at his house because his young boy had been sick, and that he'd expected us just to read his email and to arrive. When we got back to college and checked our emails, you can tell how long ago I went to university because you can check it on your phone. We got back. It was for a 9 a.m. supervision. He'd sent the email at about 9:13.
Oh, wow.
And you realise, well, this is a man who hadn't sort of seen, well how to do the practical and the right thing in that situation. He wanted to honour his commitment to give a tutorial even though his son was sick. That's great. But his practical reasoning about how to go about rearranging it had been pretty horrible.
Yeah. And what that picks up on, I think, as well, which is really important when thinking about prudence and seeing well, that it's not just about the understanding, it's about the action too. That the lack of prudence there was in what he actually did. And so we think about prudence being the virtue that enables not just our understanding, but also the action that results. That it's not just about the deliberation, say, thinking about the action, but what we actually go on to do.
Yeah, and this is going to be the difference between prudence that we're discussing now and the other three cardinal virtues or acquired virtues, as we said in the first episode. We're talking about these virtues which we can acquire through our own action for ourselves, in contrast to the theological virtues which have to be given to us by God. But prudence operates both in the intellect and the will, sort of leads from one into the other, whereas the other three that we'll look at, justice, fortitude and temperance, they're situated in the will.
So just to pick up on that and to explore a bit more at the beginning, the role of prudence in the intellect. People like to think about prudence as the virtue of seeing things well, describing the world properly. And I suppose the point we're trying to make here and develop is that there's a connection, an intrinsic connection between living well and seeing well, between how we live and how we understand the world to be. And you can see this in lots of ways. I think you recognise that the more you think about your life, every moral decision you make is based on something you think is true about the world. For instance, my views about intrinsic human dignity means I think it's wrong to be racist and treat some people as worse than others. You might say your views about use of electricity determines whether you turn the lights off or not when you walk out of a room, and so on. And even, we mentioned in the first story, Glaucon and his view that morality is just about pursuing your preferences. The way Glaucon would behave is based on something he thinks true about the world. And so everything we do presupposes something we hold to be true. And I think you can see the connection between living well and seeing well when you take the opposite extreme of paranoia. When you have a false view of reality, it's quite difficult to live, right? Everything is not an especially happy life, the paranoid life.
No, it makes me think of a T-shirt in one of my favourite books by David Foster Wallace, who I'll probably mention a fair few times in the series. One of the characters in the book, Infinite Jest, has a T-shirt that says, "Yes, I'm paranoid. The question is, am I paranoid enough?" Which I think is really great. And what you were saying there reminds us of the fact that the good life has to aim at something good.
Yes.
So you can be sort of skillful in a certain way of making bad decisions. What actually makes you virtuous is when the decisions that you're making lead towards the end that you're aiming for, and that end is in fact a good end.
Exactly, and I think that also points at why, as you mentioned earlier, prudence is not about being book smart, and your professor nicely demonstrates that. But at the other extreme, a Dominican, a brother of ours now deceased, who's a great writer on these topics, Herbert McCabe, has a slightly provocative line where he says, "No stupid person can be good." And I think he's definitely not saying that prudence and the moral being a good person is about being clever, as life experience teaches us and your example shows. But he is saying that thinking clearly and seeing the world clearly is integral to living a good life. And you can think of lots of reasons why thinking unclearly is not good for moral life. If you're bigoted, that doesn't help you be a good person. If you're pig-headed about thinking I'm always right and never listen to the opinions of others, doesn't help you live a good life. So there's a kind of, when he's saying intentionally, provocatively, no stupid person can be good, he's saying if you're willfully ignorant, that doesn't contribute to the good life.
Yeah, and you can say about somebody, well, they completely lack common sense.
Yes.
They're not able to live the day-to-day reality of life well. And I think we all probably know somebody in our lives as well who's really well-intentioned, like the really lovable character, sort of Jack in Marilyn Robinson's like fantastic series of novels that begins with Gilead comes to mind. And he's got a really good heart, but he makes horrible decisions.
Yeah.
He makes bad decisions, and these lead to an unhappy life. And it's not that he's got a fundamentally corrupted will. It's just that he doesn't choose well.
Yeah.
So I guess the question we then get into is like, okay, you've sold me. I don't want to make horrible decisions. I want to choose well. How do we go about doing that?
So St. Thomas helpfully splits up the virtue of prudence essentially into three parts. And he talks about prudence. You can put it as sizing up the situation, deliberating about what to do, and then executing your choice. And so we can think about those three parts in turn. And the first one is sizing up the situation. And that has much to do with what we've been discussing about seeing clearly, understanding the situation in which you're making a decision. But I suppose a way we can frame this is to make a good decision, you need to pursue the good, as you mentioned. So you need to have an end goal in mind. And then you're sizing up the situation is thinking about the means. How am I going to attain this end? Say there's been an earthquake, and I want to send some money to support the earthquake. I want to in some way support that appeal. There are lots of ways I can do that. I can stick some cash in an envelope and stick it in the Royal Mail and hope it gets somewhere. Or there are a whole range of charities I could choose, and some of those charities might be better than others. There might be some very well-known charities that are guaranteed to actually providing aid on the ground. You might think I want to support a smaller charity because I know they're going to get closer to the cause I particularly care about in this particular disaster. So the sizing up the situation there is about the means, thinking you've got your end in mind, and it's a stage of inquiry essentially. What are the different means for attaining this end?
So you know what you want to do. I'm drawing up my list of options for how to do it. And sometimes I guess you might just find yourself with, well, there's only one way to do this. There's only one charity that I know of that's operating in this country. But I think this is interesting that with prudence, we can sometimes have a lot of good options. And this again helps us see this other feature of the moral life, because sometimes we might think of the moral life as like, do I do the good thing or do I do the bad thing? Yeah. But in fact, there can be the good thing, the better thing, and the best thing.
Yeah. And prudence helps you decide between them. And so it gives you, and it is that stage of inquiry of looking through them. And then the second stage is often given the term judgment in the reading, to make a judgment about these. Basically, you've done your inquiry, you've got these options before you, and you make a judgment about which one to pursue. And this again is an act of the intellect, of looking at your means and seeing which is the best one in order to reach the end of my goal in mind. When I was thinking about this, it reminded me of when I was 11 or 12, and it was the first time I used eBay, and I had an iPod I really wanted to sell. I can't quite remember why, but anyway, I had this iPod I wanted to sell, and I put it on eBay and was very excited with someone immediately wanted to buy it. We really want this iPod, and paid whatever the price was on offer, and gave me an address to send it to in Hereford or somewhere. I was like, that's really exciting. Just ready to go to the post office. The next morning I got an email from them saying, I'm sorry, really urgently, we've moved to Lagos, can you send it here? And so I thought, oh yeah, sure, and just sent it straight to Lagos. Not obviously realizing it was a scam and the email address was something like ebaysales@gmail.com. So there was quite a failure of prudence in that I'd chosen my means of selling this iPod and had chosen the wrong means.
Yeah. And so most people think, well, you've not done anything immoral here in terms of like bad, but it is a horrible decision. And in terms of like getting to where we want to get to, because if you do things like this again and again, well, then maybe you start to become less trusting of people, and it can actually, making bad decisions can affect you over the long term. What strikes me is a lot of what you're talking about is a lot of what life coaches are seeking to do with people now, with prioritizing various different tasks, with your to-do lists, with your, can it wait till tomorrow? Does it need to be done today? It's all fits into the virtue of prudence, recognizing that actually a lot of people, and particularly in contemporary society where we have so many more obligations, so many more things making demands upon our time, that actually the cultivation of this virtue is more and more important. So we've had two stages, sort of like drawing up my list of options. Then that judgment phase that you mentioned about, which is the best one. Is that it? Or?
Then the third one, which is command, to actually embark upon the action you've chosen. And you were mentioning earlier about how prudence is the one virtue of the moral virtues that's both in the intellect and the will. And here we see in the will it actually commands an action. And I think what you mentioned about life coaching is really true and interesting, because so often at the moment on my Facebook feed, I think it's Motion is an AI that kind of sorts out your timetable for you. And you just see increasing number of AI tools that will basically claim to do all the decision work for you and sort out your life, give you your calendar, your to-do list and everything. And they're evidently popular because they're doing very well. And the whole point, I think, in cultivating this virtue is we can do that for ourselves. Empower those decisions.
Yeah, I both am attracted to these sorts of things because I recognize the value of them, but I'm also wary about outsourcing something that properly belongs to us as human beings. And then actually, do I just become dependent on a piece of software? I might then be doing good things, but I don't have the virtue of prudence if I'm not involved in this process of drawing up options, evaluating what is the best, and then actually following through.
And a virtue as a kind of a skill, if you don't use it goes away and you lose it. And so, I mean, I think of sports and obviously analogy or music, and I enjoy playing tennis. Haven't been playing much tennis recently, and I noticed the other day I played the first time in ages and was rubbish. There's a bit of muscle memory there, definitely, and I think you can say something similar with the virtues. It sits quite deeply if you've really been doing something for a long time, but it is something that can come and go if you're not exercising it, and that's the real worry with a lot of AI tools. As much as they're brilliant tools, if they're not used properly, you then essentially start losing skills that belong to being human.
I'm wary about outsourcing humanity. We say about muscle is interesting because I think that reflects quite well that you have with a virtue a power that is there but not fully developed.
Yeah.
But again, with muscles, we can choose to develop them in a certain way according to the particular task that we want to do.
Yes.
So if you watch World's Strongest Man, like,
do you?
I do quite enjoy. I quite enjoy it. Yeah. But these guys have got terrible stamina.
Yes.
Absolutely appalling. And so if you thought, like, I want to get really, really hench like World's Strongest Man in order that I'm going to be able to be fitter to go on long walks, like that's a terrible decision. Like, you might work really, really hard to do it, but that would be a lack of prudence, realizing that you need a different sort of fitness to do the thing that you want to do. And in the same way that the virtue, this disposition, can be trained towards doing something good, but it can also be trained towards doing something that's destructive of the human being.
Yeah. How can we think about prudence and apply some of this to kind of life's bigger decisions? Because of course we exercise prudence in the day-to-day at different levels, and of course practicing it at the small decisions builds up that muscle strength, that internal capacity. What are ways we might think about prudence in applying to, I don't know, finding a spouse, getting married, choosing where to live, a religious vocation, possibly big life decisions like that?
Yeah, I think the important thing to say first of all about prudence is that it's involved in every other virtue. We won't be able to do anything in the moral life we won't be able to act justly if we don't see what's correctly. So prudence is necessary for the operation of all the other virtues, and the other virtues actually become necessary for the operation of prudence as well, because if I decide that the thing that I need to do requires some bravery to do it, I won't be able to carry out that command phase that you spoke about if I don't actually have the virtue of fortitude. With regards to the bigger life decisions, I think it requires looking at, well, what am I aiming at in life? What is my ultimate goal? And Aquinas, when he starts his writings on the sort of the human life and on virtue and the moral life, he looks first of all at, like, what are we aiming at? What's the one thing that everybody seeks? And it's happiness. Yeah. And so recognizing prudence as something that is personal, what is happiness going to look like in my particular life? So I could have this great desire to be a heroic priest, might be really inspired when I hear about missionary priests. But if I know that I'm the sort of person who just gets really, really upset and anxious and nervous when the slightest thing goes wrong and can't cope with a mosquito or any difficult thing, then that's not going to be the sort of thing which it's prudent for me to do. So I think self-knowledge is an important part of prudence.
And that picks up on another related important part of prudence. So St. Thomas, with these virtues, speaks about lots of different parts of each of the virtues. Sort of, we can think about them as sub-virtues. Like, to be a good singer, you need to be good at listening. And it's similar with these virtues. And one he says, which I find really interesting, is foresight. Providentia is the Latin word he uses, which is this ability in your stage of deliberation and looking at the different means, thinking through, is this means likely to actually fulfill my end? Is this a sensible means to the end, and what's likely to happen? And I'm reading Frankenstein at the moment, which I never read before. Someone I'm preparing to be received into the church lent it to me very kindly, and I thought, obviously knew a bit of the story, but never read it. And it just really struck me last night, actually, when I was reading. The first time Frankenstein creates the demon, zero prudence or foresight is exercised. Doesn't even entertain the question of what might this creature become. And then later on in the book, when the demon has tried to pressurize him into making a companion, then he exercises some foresight and decides not to make the second creature. What might happen? I haven't actually finished it yet, so who knows what will happen. But that just struck me as a good example of actually exercising some prudence in terms of foresight, of thinking through what are the likely consequences of my decision.
But prudence won't give you absolute certainty.
Exactly, and Thomas is really clear on that.
About what's going to happen. So you can have foresight, but prudence is not somehow the virtue whereby I develop God vision. And
exactly, and I found it interesting to see very clearly in St. Thomas saying prudence will not remove anxiety. That there will always be some element of uncertainty because we can't tell the future. Prudence isn't a supernatural power. It's a natural power.
Whilst we're on books and looking at prudence, in that sort of couple of books which came to mind with me, and I think fiction is really important for developing the virtue of prudence, because we get to enter into the world of what it's like to be someone else. It exercises our moral imagination, and I think it can happen to us in TV and film sometimes, that we watch the person and we're like, don't do that, that's a really bad choice. But when we're reading a book in a particular way, we enter into their life and we're like, no, dude, really don't know. And then we can recognize that in our own life. But a book which a lot of people said to me is like fantastic, William Boyd's Any Human Heart.
Okay.
And it charts you through this man's life, living in a period of real change. And one of the things that I just found so exasperating about it was that he's just as stupid at the end of his life as he was at the beginning of his life. There's no moral development. He's still making the same mistakes over and over again. He's not a bad person, but he's still hurting people in the same ways just through not thinking things through well. In contrast, in a really, really wonderful book, which I'd recommend to anybody who's interested in reading and growing in the virtues, on Reading Well, by Karen Swallow Prior. Fantastic name. And she chooses sort of great classic of English literature, Henry Fielding's Tom Jones, as an example of Tom, who is this sort of erratic, rambunctious, very sort of feeling-driven young character, but as somebody who actually goes through genuine growth and actually starts to see better and then to choose more wisely.
Which picks up on a question of how do we grow in these acquired virtues, and of course practice, exercising them. But I think what you're getting at picks up on the other important way we grow in these virtues, which is education, learning about them. And that's not just book education, that's life experience and listening to others and so on. And I think what's interesting here is another sub-virtue of prudence that St. Thomas talks about. Another part is docility. And docility essentially means teachableness, the ability to be taught by others. And it makes the really important point that our seeing the world well requires other voices. Often it's other people who can, for instance, in terms of self-knowledge, see ourselves in a certain aspect better than we can. And the desire to seek out guidance and help, that might come from literature, that of course comes from the lives of the saints and scripture, but also friends and family. And in my life, I definitely really think about that in terms of discerning a vocation to be a Dominican. And we have, as you know well, as our vocations director, we have a process of joining. And the process I found quite thorough, but helpfully thorough. You have a series of interviews, there's a psychological assessment, you fill out you write a statement, some references. And by the end of that process, I remember feeling there's then a group that vote and decide, do they think you might have a vocation, is this the right life for you, and so on. I remember feeling at the end of that process, that group of people know me about as well as they can, not in an intrusive way, but in a full sense of who I am. And so if they think I might have a vocation, then maybe I really do. And there's just something really encouraging about relying on the advice of others there, who can see more of the picture.
Yeah, docility is so important. There's a really great set of essays by Father James Shaw called Another Set of Learning. And I can't remember which way round it is, but one is on what the teacher owes the students, and the other one is on what a student owes his teacher. And when you're at school or a student, you don't really think, you think all about, well, it's his job to be entertaining, or, if she's not, this, not well prepared, then I don't really owe this person anything. And it's like, well, no, actually, in this relationship, there is a certain something that you owe them, even if you're not particularly entertained by them. And this docility enables us to learn the best that we can in any given situation. And another part of prudence is asking people who are wiser than us. And that's one of the things that we're blessed with, I think, in our Dominican life. That we live with older people. People who've just been around the block a bit more. And contemporary society doesn't have nearly as much intergenerational contact as it used to. The likelihood of somebody living close to their grandparents now is pretty small. This is why church is one of the great things of intergenerational contact, but particularly community life with older people. And you realize sometimes, oh, now I understand why they do things this way, or why they made this change.
And different generations just do see the world differently.
Yes.
It's just wonderful having your vision expanded by that. And this, I think all this really points to the fact that prudence, but all the virtues are social things. We learn them in community. And just as we're educated in education in the broad sense of a human formation. And this, of course, very nicely takes us to social relations and how we live together and do the good to the other, which is the topic of justice, which I believe we shall be coming on to in our next episode.
I think that might happen. I look forward to it.
So do I. Thank you. See you there.
Thank you.
Good Habits is a CTS production in collaboration with the Dominican Friars in Britain.
And Radio Maria England. And if you've liked this episode, which I sincerely hope you have, then please do like and subscribe.